Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the CFE Support webinar series. My name is Debbie Bayless. Today's webinar is on time management and day 3. Before I begin, I want to extend a big thank you to CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic School of Business for their great partnership in making sure that this valuable information is available to you as you prepare to write CFE in September. This webinar is approximately 75 minutes long, and then I will open up the floor for any questions that you may have. Now, if you have questions during this webinar, please don't hold back. Ask those questions by using the Q&A function, because I have colleagues who are more than happy to answer those questions. So again, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. If, due to time constraints, we're unable to answer your questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your appropriate region or province. I've included their email addresses here. Now, two of the most common questions candidates have is this webinar being recorded? And yes, it is. The recording will be available in approximately 2 days or so under the news section on the home page for Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE. Many candidates also ask us, are the slides available? Unfortunately, they are not. However, you do have access to go back and watch the recording and stop it at any point to make some appropriate notes. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time focusing on one of the key success factors that increase your chances of passing CFE, and that's around critical reading, creating your outline, and planning. So as a result, today I'm going to share a best practice with you that many of the candidates have used throughout the professional education program. And as a result, they've successfully passed their module exams, but more importantly, they successfully passed CFE the first time. So I'm going to be creating an outline for the Tiny Co Day 3 case. And I'm going to be showing you that best practice of creating your outline in Word. I'm also going to highlight some of the key triggers that you should be on the lookout that indicate you need to and help you identify the requirements. An important component of the planning process is determining the type of quantitative analysis you need to perform. So I'm going to review the various quantitative tools, how they assist, what kinds of questions they answer, and how that information can be helpful to the user so the user is able to make an informed decision. Another very important key success factor is time management. So remember, the goal is to complete all of the assessment opportunities to the best of your ability within the time frame that you have. So when it comes to your financial reporting, management accounting, and your role-specific assessment opportunities, so those same word is required, what you're being asked to do, the goal is to achieve as many competent responses as possible, because that will increase your chances of passing level 2 and level 3. If you don't complete an assessment opportunity, then you're going to be awarded an NA, which means it wasn't addressed. If you just put together a very superficial response, then that rating is going to be NC. NAs and NCs will not be, they aren't helpful and they aren't considered when you look at the various levels that you must pass in order to pass combined day 2 and day 3. Now, if you aren't aware or if you haven't had a chance to watch Understanding the CFE, I strongly recommend that you watch that recording because I spend an awful lot of time talking about the different levels and how CFE is marked. An important approach and strategy is to make sure that your response is clear and concise. This helps when it comes to time management. So I'm going to spend some time talking about how do you make sure that your response is clear and concise. And I'm going to highlight some of the common discussion frameworks or structures that you should use for particular requireds. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to provide you with solutions for many of the common challenges that the Board of Examiners have identified in their reports over the last 5 years that have resulted in candidates failing CFE. So let's start with critical reading, outlining, and planning. So as I said, I'm going to create the outline for Titan Co. Day 3 case. For those of you who are enrolled in Capstone 2, this is the case that you are either going to go through in the upcoming module workshop, or if you're watching it after the workshop, this is the case that you would have done. If you are challenging the exam, I've included here where you can access that case, the marking guide, and a sample response. So before we even start the outline, I want to talk about some of the common challenges the Board of Examiners have found. They have found that candidates are missing key case facts, and they're unsure of what is specifically they're being asked to do. So in a recent Board of Examiners report, so September 2025, this is what they said. It's become more persuasive that candidates are not understanding the specific required or misreading, misinterpreting the case facts presented. Candidates should ensure they have a good understanding of the specific context for any request being addressed before addressing them, and that any analysis performed incorporates elements specific to the case as presented. So again, when I create this outline, I'm going to provide you some advice on how to mitigate these challenges. Make sure you're extracting the relevant case facts and you're including them in your outline. And I'm going to show you that when it comes to your required, make sure that you write out the required word for word and break it down into smaller pieces so that you make sure that you've addressed every component of what you're being asked to do. So why create an outline? Well, the outline itself, and if you implement the best practice I'm sharing with you, it will help you address many of these common challenges. Because again, you're going to extract the relevant case facts, which means that's going to help. That's going to reduce the chances of you missing relevant case information. If you create the outline and you've got all of your case facts, you've got your structure already in place, it's going to help with time management. That outline becomes the roadmap for your response. Also, if you follow the best practice of writing that required word for word and breaking it down into smaller pieces, then that's going to help ensure that you understand what you need to do and that you're going to address all of that components of the required, which is going to significantly increase your chances of achieving a competent response. Once you've got that outline all created, then you get to sit back and you can look at the big picture. You can look at what you need to do, how much information you already have, and then you're going to assign times for each of those required. So I know that there's differing points of view of whether you should create your outline on paper or if you should create it in Word. I also know that there are some personal preferences. The best practice I'm going to share with you is creating your outline in Word. And the reason being is because there's some very strong pros to do this. Everything is all in one document. You can start to create that structure from the beginning. So each of your requireds is going to be your heading. You're going to figure out what you need to do and therefore indicate the structure. The last point is it says it may be faster. Well, I'm going to argue that it is faster. And let me provide you with a specific example. Recently, I was an exam supervisor for CFE, and it was about 75 minutes into the day one case, day one. And one of my invigilators came up to me, and he's a non-CPA, and he said, "Debbie, I'm really concerned. I've noticed that every person here except one has pages of information already in Word, and there's one person who has nothing in Word. So I'm worried that something's wrong." And I said, "No, there isn't anything wrong. Everybody except this one person is creating their outline in Word. I've walked by this individual, and this candidate is creating their outline on paper." So at the 75-minute mark, everyone else had 5, 6 pages of relevant case facts and their structure already in place. This individual who had the information on the paper was going to have to take time to transpose that. So say even if they typed it in quickly, it's going to take them another 10 or 15 minutes. So they're behind where their peers were. So that's why I would argue it is faster. But it does take time and it does take practice. Now, there are some cons, there are some disadvantages, depending on how good your eyesight is, because you're going to be writing on a small screen. You're only going to be looking at one page at a time, or if your eyesight's pretty good, you're going to be looking at maybe 2 pages at a time. So you are going to have to scroll up and down. The good news is one of the ways to reduce this con is that you do one of the functions that does work, because there are certain functions that do not work in Surpass, is the find function. That does work. So you can do that to be able to find where you want to put that information quickly. It's also difficult to get a quick snapshot of what the requirements are that you need to do and, allocating your time. So I'm going to share with you in a little while a best practice of how you completely mitigate this con. So let's create the outline for the Tiny Code Day 3 case. So for the next 25 minutes, we're going to go through this whole process. And you're going to notice on the slide that I actually have information from the case. That information, what I've done is I've highlighted it for you. I've also indicated, where that information is going to fall when it comes to the outline. Now, I've done that for illustration purposes only. Why would you spend time highlighting information, putting, where it falls within the case and then typing it? Why don't you just avoid some of those unnecessary steps and as you're reading, put in the information? Okay. So the first step is to allocate time to planning. This is a 75-minute case. So the recommendation is that you should allocate anywhere from 25 to 30% for planning. So that means, let's just say, and the best practice I'm showing you, I'm going on the higher end, but you'll understand why. So I'm going to allocate 25 minutes to reading, outlining, and planning. So my start time is, say, 9 o'clock, and I'm going to go till 9:25. The remaining 15 minutes, I'm going to write my response. And I'm going to break that down into smaller time buckets once I know what each of the requirements are. The next step is to read the narrative. So in the first few paragraphs, there's some important information that I'm going to extract and put it into my outline. Well, it tells me who the users are, Christopher and Sean. It gives me some information about their business, their background, about their relationship. And I'm sitting here thinking, that information is probably important. I'm not sure where it's going to fall, but let's just put that information in my outline. The best thing about creating your outline is in Word is you can take that information and move it around. It's important to know what your role is. So in this instance, you're working for a public accounting firm, which means that the brothers are looking to you for advice. Make sure that you record the current date and when year end is. So we've extracted everything we need from the first few paragraphs. Now, the second paragraph, here is my first required. And again, I've highlighted the key information. You'll notice that I have a little bit here of a comment box and I have R1. That's just for you to reference that when you're looking at the feedback guide, that is the first required. If you'll notice what I've done in my memo is I'm going to use the title of what the required is. I'm not going to put R1. I'm just going to simply put appropriate business model. So I know that I need to perform a quantitative analysis. And here are two things that I want to remind myself that I need to do. This is what they're asking me. Determine the best model given the demand for each selling price. And then what's the selling price for the chosen model? So those are the two types of calculations I need to perform. I've also included a subtitle of assumptions. And I put a question mark because sometimes it's important to discuss assumptions. And the trigger is if based on case facts, there's a reason why the input amount that you've used might be different, then you need to discuss that particular input and why it might be different and how that would impact your quantitative results. When it comes to recommendations, again, I need to provide two recommendations. So I'm going to put in a bullet point. I need to do these two things. Recommend which is the best model and recommend which is the appropriate selling price for the chosen model. The next thing I'm asked to do is funding sources. And I'm asked to identify the advantages and the disadvantages. So I put the word why because I want to remind myself, I don't want to simply just state the case facts because I'll never meet the depth requirement. I need to answer that question, so what? Why is that particular qualitative factor an advantage? What is the potential positive impact to the company? And I need to provide a recommendation. There's also a relevant case fact that I want to extract, that they need 600,000 for startup by the end of this spring. So the next paragraph, here's another two requirements. They're asking us, this is a financial reporting issue, so how to account for the grant. And under the issue, I'm going to put what they're asking me to do. So how to account for the funds received and potential repayments. So right away, I know the format that I should be using when I'm analyzing financial reporting issues is IGAR. So I have issue, gap, it tells me it's ASPE, analysis, and I'm going to put that I'm going to have to analyze both funds received, potential repayments, and for recommendations, again, I'm putting funds received, potential repayments, because I need to provide recommendations on both, and I've included impact. Then they ask me, we need to perform and provide audit procedures for the grant. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when I'm asked to do audit procedures is RAP. So risk, account, assertions, and procedure. So I'm going to put that format in and then I at least have the structure already in place as I go through the appendices of what are the different risks. So the next paragraph, they're asking us to perform a SWOT analysis. Again, I'm including a friendly reminder that I need to include the why and the impact. That's why they gave me the information about their business experience, their working relationship. So the great news is, let's take that information that we had previously extracted. So strengths, Christopher provides business expertise. They have a good working relationship. Sean specializes in high quality tiny house construction. Some of the weaknesses are that Christopher's experiences with luxury, not tiny homes. The brothers can be stubborn, and Chris will still be working at luxury. You'll notice too, I've included an equal sign. And this is another friendly reminder that when I go to complete my response, that equal sign needs to be replaced by the why and the impact. So when I finish my response, there will not be an equal sign, but that is a great way of reminding me include that why and impact. So the last required is around moving expenses. And there's very specific questions that Sean is asking. And if they ask you to do something, the key to achieving a competent is to do it to the best of your ability. Answer those questions. So I've written each of those down because I want to make sure that I address it. Can he deduct all the moving expenses on his personal income tax return? Are his expenses deductible? So I need to tell him what's deductible, what's not, and if it's not deductible, why? Is there anything else that he should know regarding the eligibility of the move? And there's also a relevant case fact that I need to extract. So $5,000 relocation allowance was given to Sean by Luxury to help cover some of his costs. So at this point, I've now gone through the narrative. So the next thing I recommend is, and this is kind of, it combats that negative, that con about having not being able to see the snapshot all on one page, is to take one of those pages from your rough booklet and write down each of the requireds. So that's the best model, funding, grant, audit procedures, SWOT, and moving expenses. You might as well write it down because at some point you're going to have to allocate time. So before you even scan that, you know what you need to do. Now just quickly look at the appendices. Okay, so the first appendix is on industry information, which right away I know as soon as I see that title or marketing information, I know that's where I'm going to get my information for my SWOT. Appendix 2 is about the appropriate business model. Appendix 3 has information, funding source, account for grant, audit procedures, and the last appendix has the moving expenses. So now when it comes to step 4, what we're going to do is carefully read those appendices and organize those case facts. So the first thing is, under the industry information, there's lots of opportunities that have been identified and lots of threats. So let's extract that information. And again, I'm going to put in that equal sign because that will remind me I need to go back and include the why and the impact. Because if you don't include the why and the impact, you will never achieve a competent response. You must meet the breadth requirement. We're not going to have a problem meeting the breadth requirement because we're extracting all those relevant case facts, but we need to put in the why and the impact to meet the depth requirement. So the opportunities, the industry is growing exponentially. It combats rising housing costs. Some of the competitors lack the expertise in the tiny house construction. Customers value innovation and high quality construction. However, there are also some threats. There's a significant increase in the number of competitors in North America. Large amount of startup capital is required, and the quality of work for many competitors is poor, which has negatively impacted industry sales and reputation. So, our SWOT's looking pretty strong. So here is Appendix 2. And here is all of the quantitative information I'm going to need. Now, this part of the best practice I'm sharing with you, it is up to you whether you use this or not. I do want to clarify that you should only do this when it comes to the day 3 cases. You should not use this section of the best practice when it comes to day 1 or day 2. Day 3, your time is very, very tight. And if you're like many of us, we're kinesthetic learners, which means when we're looking at quantitative information, it doesn't really register unless we do something with it. In this aspect, you can start putting that information in Excel, okay? But caution, do not perform the calculations. Just extract the relevant case facts. I'm telling you to put it in Excel because that's ultimately where you're going to perform the calculations. So you're going to put the purpose, and that's to determine the profitability for each business model. And you're going to put in the demand and the price at each demand. And there's the two models. The next paragraph, here's some more threats. So let's add those on. In regards to commodity prices are subject to volatility, that the typical buyer earns 50,000 or less, so they're looking for very affordable housing, and that they want the builder to provide the World Tiny House Organization certification. So again, really strong SWOT analysis. When it comes to, there's some additional information. So we've got the volume, and that dictates what the price is. Now we've got cost. So I'm going to create I'm going to put this information in Excel. And the purpose here for this particular quantitative analysis is to calculate the cost per unit for each business model. So I'm going to take that information and input it. You'll notice I put in notes for two particular items so that again, I can explain why those amounts are different. So for the construction labor, you'll notice I'll put note 1 and I'm putting the note right beside it. So for model 2, there's a savings of $8,000. For the material cost for model 2, the material cost is $4,000 more. Now there is one more note that I'm going to put at the bottom that I'm not including the fixed costs because they are not direct costs. But it is telling me that the fixed cost is 100,000 annually if they produce up to 16 houses. And if it's more than 16 houses, it's going to be 160. So now let's go back to the first exhibit, the first calculation, and I'm going to put the overhead costs in. Okay, so now I've got my price per unit. The cost per unit, I'm going to calculate that in the one below and then bring it up. But again, I'm not going to perform any of the calculations until I've completed the outline. Don't fall into that trap. Keep going. So Appendix 3, here are the different funding sources. And there's actually 5 of them. So what I'm going to do is extract the relevant information. So personal savings talks about if they have enough, it will exhaust their savings. They do have enough, but it's going to exhaust their savings and they can use RSPs. To borrow from Cashmar, so it tells you how much that they can borrow. The monthly repayment has to be done within over 2-year period. The interest rate, and it tells you that if the payment if any payments are missed, then full balance is due. Angel investor, again, 600,000, but in exchange for 60% ownership. And another relevant case fact is that the investor has extensive business experience and is well known in the technical community. So one of the things that I'm also putting as a friendly reminder, so I'm not going to kind of create the advantages and disadvantages at this point. I'll do that when I go back and create my response. But I need to remind myself again to include the why and the impact. And you'll notice I have the word and balanced. What that means is you're being tested as an entry level CPA. So the expectation is that you provide an objective analysis, which means you need to look at both the positive reasons to do something and the negative reasons to do it. So that, your advantages and your disadvantages. Now, when we talk about balance, it means that you need to look at both of them. It doesn't mean that you need to have three advantages and three disadvantages. Okay. So now we're getting more information from this grant. As I'm reading this information, I'm thinking, wow, there's an awful lot that I need to address. So I'm going to break this up into two different responses. So the first response, the issue is I'm going to look at how to account for the funds received. And there's some important case facts. Now, what I do is I extract those important case facts. I just put it under issue. It's not going to remain there. I'm going to use that information when I perform my analysis. So if you want to instead include that information under your analysis, that's great. So the important information is that they would receive 550,000. It has to be allocated over two. It's allocated over operational expenses and capital expenses. And when it comes to the operational expenses, they have to spend at least 60,000 for each of the 4 years. So when it comes to my analysis, I need to analyze, I need to discuss both the 350,000 towards the operating expenses, the recognition, and the 200,000 towards the capital expenditures. And I need to provide recommendations on how to recognize or whether to recognize or what amount for the operational expenses and for the capital expenses. The other financial reporting issue I need to analyze is how to account for potential repayments. And the important case fact here, if the grant, if the money from the grant was not spent appropriately, full amount must be repaid. So again, I need to talk about the potential repayment in my analysis for the operational expenses and for the capital expenses and provide recommendations. So you see, it makes more sense to address each of these individually. Now, this has also given me some valid information when it comes to talking about the financing uh, options and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages. So let's add that information in. So they would receive 550,000, not 600,000. And the amount is fully forgivable, providing that the company provides an audit report confirming compliance with the grant requirements. And if the requirements are not met, full payment must be repaid. So again, here's some more information that I have when it comes to the advantages and disadvantages. So one of the things I want to highlight in regards to this financial reporting issue is that when it comes to grants, the proficiency level in your competency map is proficiency level A. And I have been a session leader for Capstone 2 for many years, and I know that many of the candidates find this particular assessment opportunity challenging. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not even sure how to approach this, make sure you make a note because this is government grants are proficiency level A. So here's some information about the grant requirements. And once I start looking at what the requirements are, it really isn't account or assertion specific. So I'm going to take out the word account and assertion, and I'm going to write down what those requirements are. And then obviously I'm going to address as many as I can within the time that I have to do. Okay. Probably won't get them all done. That's okay. Do as much as you can within the time frame that you have. So when it comes to your moving expenses, here's the appendix that has all of the information and the associated notes to what is the current um, moving expenses. So what I would recommend is in one of the I got really good news is that for CFE, if you have more than 10 lines of financial information, they will include that in Excel. They'll include it in an other um, tab that you can't calculate anything in, but you can copy and paste it. So in this instance, what I would do is I would copy and paste the existing information from that tab. And what we're going to have to do is calculate the net moving expenses. We're going to need to make some adjustments. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply copy that from the tab, and then I'm going to come back to it later. So I'll probably put, you know what, I recommend putting the page number there because if you start to go through each of those notes, you're going to get distracted and you're going to start performing the calculations, and that's not part of the planning process. So I want to show you an example of what this pre-populated financial information looks like. So if you notice, sheet 1, that's the only sheet that you can perform calculations in. When it comes to day 1, there'll be 2 additional tabs, one English, one French. So in each of these additional tabs, if any of the financial information is 10 lines or longer, then you can copy that information because those tabs are read only and put it into your sheet 1. So for day 2, you're going to have a tab for common, and for each of the tabs, you have English and French. For your roles, you're going to have for each of your roles. And then for day 3, you're going to have case 1, case 2, and case 3. So let's kind of quickly go over the remaining steps of the planning process. So step 5 is to take that step back and pause. And it's really done in conjunction with step 6, which is planning what you're going to do. Well, we've already planned what we're going to do because as we've created that outline, we've created the necessary structure. Step 7 and 8 are really done in tangent, and that's ordering the requireds and ranking them. So think about it in the context of, so what order should these requireds be done? And an important consideration is there any integration that exists? So in other words, your analysis of one of the assessment opportunities and your recommendation will impact the other. Yes, there are some financial reporting issues. However, they don't impact any of the quantitative analysis that you need to perform. So you can do these required in the order in which it was given. So let's talk about some of the common time management challenges that the board of directors see. Is that candidates spend too much time on certain assessment opportunities. And that could be for 2 reasons, because it's something you love to do and you do it very well. So you're spending an exorbitant amount of time. Remember, there's no additional points that are rewarded if you achieve a competent with distinction response. Another reason could be that it's something that you're very uncomfortable with, and therefore you're not sure how to approach it, and it's taking you more time. So what happens is candidates run out of time. Sometimes they run out of time too because they haven't allocated any time for any of the requirements. I've seen lots of candidates allocate the time, but they don't stick to their time budget. So one of the things I always do as an exam supervisor is I walk around. Are candidates allocating their time? Are they watching their time closely? So what are the time allocation tips? You need to write the start and stop time for each required so that you know again that when you're looking at that clock, you need to watch that clock too. How much time do I have to complete that required? Now, the last one, I'm very, very cautious in even mentioning this about adjusting your time. And the reason I am is if you adjust your time and find out you don't need as much, well, that's great. But that's not what happens. What mostly happens is candidates steal, say, 2 minutes here for a required in the first case. So say they in this instance there's 6 required. You steal 2 minutes each. That means in the end now you're 12 minutes behind. So by the time you hit the last case, you could be anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes behind. You have that much less time to do those required, which means you most likely aren't going to be able to complete 2 or 3 requireds. And that will have a significant impact on your chances of passing. It's really going to reduce your chances. So you've got to watch the time and stick to those time budgets. So here is the time allocation that I would use based on what I've shown you as the best practice. So I spent 25 minutes doing the reading, outlining, planning. Then when I look at how much time do I need for each of the requireds, I'm going to look at how much do I already have in the outline. So you notice some of these items, the best model, the SWOT, very little time. Okay, more on the funding, more on the grant, and a little bit more on the audit procedures and tax. And I always like to leave some time to review so that I can kind of go back and finish everything. So I want to just take a moment and I want to bring up just so that you can see, here is the outline that I created on those slides for you. If you notice I've crossed out things, this is information that you're going to get rid of, okay? But here is your outline. This gives you a pretty good sense of, like, look at your SWOT. You're not even going to need 5 minutes. All you need to add is the why and the impact, get rid of that, and it's done. Here is your Excel. Okay, here's your calculations. So it's not going to take you very long because all you need to do is total this up, add it here, and then determine what the profit is. Okay, so again, base the time that you're allocating on how much is already in your outline. So what are the tips for success? Time management, it's challenging for most candidates. And the best way to manage your time is to practice writing cases in the recommended time. So for those of you, who are just starting Capstone 2, when you first start, it's going to be very difficult to complete all of the assessment opportunities within the time that's given. But you've got to work towards that end goal. You have to have a good sense of what you can do within the time frame that you have. And again, stick to that recommended time and stick to managing your time. So let's take a moment and talk about the various triggers. So there may be direct requests. There may be what we call undirected requests. Those requests could be, they're mostly found in the narrative, but be on the lookout. There could be a request in your appendices. Look for keywords such as they're asking, directs, wonders, helps us. What's your view? So let's talk about some of the examples of direct requireds. And for the Tiny Co case, these were all direct requireds. So it could be that Denise asked you to prepare evaluation, that she directs you, that he would like you to review a proposal. Those are all examples of direct triggers. Here's some example of indirect triggers, indirect requires. So the user may be confused about something. So they might use the words, I'm a little unsure. Maybe I think I've probably done this right. Likely the information's correct. So be on the lookout for that because they might not specifically ask you, but based on that, yeah, that is what we call an indirected required or undirected required. Both words work. Something the user says that they do not have, and you think, yeah, but you need that. So you need to explain what they need and why. Something that the user thinks is correct, but is potentially incorrect. So sometimes for financial reporting issues, they don't think that they've done something incorrectly. They might have told you, yes, we just received $150,000 for a signing bonus, and we recognize that full amount of revenue when we received it. So they don't think it's an issue. You need to analyze that because you need to determine when revenue should be recognized and at what amount. There could be a hidden issue that the user should know about. And there's structural triggers. If there's some information that's provided to you, ask yourself, why is it being given to me? Something that directly addresses the user's objectives or concerns the user. So what's the importance of addressing the user's request? Well, whether it's an indirect or a direct request required, that is a required. And a required is an assessment opportunity. That's why I say those words are interchangeable. And assessment opportunities drive whether you pass or don't pass CFE. So again, understanding CFE and how it's marked. If you haven't watched that webinar, it's very, very important that you do. So here is a very appropriate quote from a very famous Canadian hockey player, Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you don't accept a user's request, you're going to get an NA, a not addressed. And it's not going to count towards any of those levels that you need to achieve in order to pass CFE. So I've talked about understanding the various and determining the appropriate quantitative tool and analysis you need to perform. Now, all this information I'm going to review, this all came from the ebook, the Management Accounting ebook. So let's talk about cost volume profit analysis. And that assists in pricing products. It helps you analyze the impact of the changes of volume or the changes in cost would have on the company's short-term profit. It also helps determine how the mix of products affect profitability. So these are the types of questions it could answer and the types of information it would provide to the user. So what are some of the quantitative tools? Break-even analysis. So calculating the minimum unit or revenue required to cover the fixed and variable costs. Target profit. So the sales unit or dollars that are needed to attain a particular level of profit. The point of indifference, and this is when the decision maker benefit is equal in analyzing two or more decisions. Now, every one of these quantitative tools are proficiency level A. Within the professional education program, I've only seen one case, and it was for Core 2. It was in the module workshop where the point of indifference needed to be calculated. It is proficiency level A, and candidates did not know how to approach it. And recently it was on CFE, and guess what? Candidates performed poorly when it came to the point of indifference. So again, during the stress management webinar, took some time to show you how to sort the Excel version of the competency map. That's your syllabus. So please make sure that you watch that section. Now, here is a very important analysis, contribution margin analysis. And the first thing that should always come to mind is be on the lookout for constraint, because if there is, you should be calculating contribution margin per constraint. And that helps determine the appropriate product mix to maximize profit. So variance analysis, that helps with breaking down the costs into those that relate to price and quantity. It helps the organization troubleshoot for unexpected results. So again, when you're performing a variance analysis, you need to, you know, uh, include relevant case facts to explain why the variance is favorable or unfavorable. And as a CPA, it's important that we highlight what they should investigate. So that's around the troubleshooting. And it helps promote continuous learning and improvement. So there's several variance analysis that you need to know and be able to do. So flexible budget variance, sales volume variance. And I noticed within the professional education program that a lot of the cases don't cover this. And in past CFE cases, this was not done very well. Sales price variance, the price or rate variance, and efficiency variance. So it's very important that you're very comfortable calculating variances and know that those variances are not going to be easy. Most likely, they're not going to give you the standard quantity. You're going to have to figure that out. So capital budgeting, it helps determine the profitability of a capital investment. It helps the user make long-term decisions that would involve large capital expenditures. So the different quantitative tools, net present value. Very important to be comfortable with the net present value. And as you know, that adjusts the cash flow for the time value of money using an appropriate discount rate based on the level of risk. Now, one of the things that I really need to highlight is say that you're looking at implementing a new division. When you include the cash flows, you should only include the incremental revenue and costs that are the result of implementing that option. Okay, that for that new division only, not for the company as a whole. If, say, for example, they're looking at, I'd say, purchasing large equipment so that they can produce a new product. So if they produce product B, that means that they're not able to produce 500 units of, say, product A. Well, you also, in your analysis, need to include the lost opportunity costs because now they're not able to produce that 500 units of product A. So you're going to have to subtract the lost contribution margin for those 500 units. Also, a very important best practice is to create a net present value shell. So in other words, know what you need to include in year 0, know how you handle when you need to increase working capital. And so you're going to add that in the appropriate time frame. And then, of course, you're going to subtract it in the appropriate time frame, but then you're going to add it back in the final year. So make sure that you know what needs to be included. If there's salvage value, if there is then lost, lost tax on the tax shield. When you're doing NPV, sometimes you'll find that from period 4 through to period 25, that the net cash flow is the same. So an easy thing to do is to calculate the present value of an annuity and bring that back to time 0. So make sure that you can do that. The internal rate of return. So that calculates the discounted rate for the project, that would result in a 0 net present value. Payback period. So that measures how long an investment takes to pay back itself or to break even. So valuation, that's about determining the value of an asset or a business. And there's several types of quantitative analysis that you can perform. An adjusted net asset valuation. And you would use that when the company doesn't maintain active operations, or maybe they have active operations, but there's really no earnings, or it's also a very good analysis to perform so that you at least know what the floor value is. So, in other words, what is the value of the company's assets? Income-based approach. And that's used when an entity is a going concern and has active operations. Market-based approach. That's when you have publicly traded information that's available and you have reasonable comparable information. So that'll help you determine the fair market value of that particular company. So financial statement analysis. And what this does is this helps determine the financial health of a company. Once you've calculated your ratios, then you can compare the company's performance against industry benchmarks. If you've got information for more than 1 year, then you can look at the trend. Is the ratio improving? Is it getting worse? Is it stable? So you're able to identify some issues. So the types of analysis that you would perform, a horizontal trend. So that's comparing financial information over time. Vertical trend, or what's also known as common size trend. So that compares the accounts with a single line item, which is typically revenue. Or a ratio analysis. So all those different ratio analysis, you should be very comfortable in performing those. And as I said, if you have information for more than 1 year, it's critical that you talk about the trend year over year. So when it comes to different costing methods, you have 4 different costing methods. Job costing, so that's used when a product or service is uniquely identified. Process costing, and that's used when there's a mass production of identical products. Activity-based costing. This is another proficiency level A. Candidates really struggle. I've seen them struggle in the professional education program, and I've also seen them struggle when it comes to CFE if there are activity-based costing assessment opportunities. Make sure that you're comfortable. And so what that does is that recognizes that activities are driven by different costs. So first you have to determine the appropriate cost pools, determine the appropriate driver, and then calculate the allocation rate. Joint product costing. And that's where, the product share one or more of the production processes, and then at some, and it can't be traced to those individual products until the split off point. So it's important that you're comfortable with each of these costing methods. There's also some cost-based pricing strategies, and that is cost plus. So adding a markup to the cost, uh, to, uh, to the cost of the selling price. The variable product cost-based pricing, so adding a particular percentage or dollar amount to the variable cost to determine the selling price. Full absorption costs, so that means that the selling price includes all costs, including fixed costs. And then life cycle cost pricing. So that's, determining the appropriate selling price that's going to maximize profits over the product's entire life cycle. When it comes to demand pricing, demand-based strategies, it's important to know what those options are and to be able to explain them to the user. So predatory, penetration, price skimming, price bundling, peak load, and loss leading. Transfer pricing. So very important to know and be able to discuss the advantages and disadvantages and to determine whether these three options, which of them is most appropriate. So cost-based transfer pricing, market-based transfer pricing, or negotiated transfer pricing. Now, when it comes to negotiated transfer pricing, it's important to state what the minimum transfer price is. And the minimum transfer price should be what the variable costs are for that particular division up to the point of transfer, plus any opportunity costs. So let me go into that in greater detail. One of the very important case facts that you need to consider, you need to look at is that division of that company operating at full capacity? And is there an external market? So, because you need to determine what's in the best interest of the company as a whole. If that division is operating at full capacity and there is an external market, the minimum transfer price for that division to another division within the company, because that's what that division and the company as a whole would have earned, is the market price. If there's excess capacity or there is no external market for the product that that division is creating, then the minimum price should be the variable cost. And really, what should happen is when it comes to how you assess that particular division's performance, you should treat it as a cost center. So let's spend just a little bit of time going through the writing strategies. So some of the common challenges that the board of directors see is that the responses, they're not clear and concise. There's a lot of unnecessary information. And also that candidates, they're just simply restating the case facts that were given to them when they performed their qualitative analysis. They haven't answered that question, so what? In other words, they haven't included the why and the impact. So the goal is when you're writing your response, you want to make sure that your response is marker friendly. The CPA markers, there's a great process in place. They want to make sure that they give you credit for the information that and the work that you've done. But you need to make sure that your response is clear and concise. It's well organized. As you start writing your responses to previous CFE cases and you go to debrief them, quickly, make sure that you look at your response and say, compare it to not the solution, because the solution is perfect, it was not done within the time frame that you have. Bring up a sample response and look at that, but before you compare yours to it, make sure that you're also looking at the marked feedback guide for that sample response. So if they achieved a competent for that particular required, compare yours. Look at the feedback guide, mark your own, and then ask yourself, is there a lot of information that I included that wasn't necessary? Cross it out. Teach yourself to be clear and concise. I always say when you're identifying your qualitative factors, really try and make sure that it's only, no more than 2 lines. You should be able to say those factors and the why and the impact very distinctly. Make sure that your response is assertive and confident, and that your conclusions are well supported, reasoned, and supported. So yesterday, during the live webinar in the Path to Competent, I talked about, and day 2, I talked about what is a supported recommendation. So you need to highlight the strongest quantitative and the strongest qualitative reasons. Don't say, based on my quantitative and qualitative analysis, I recommend implementing this option. That is not a supported recommendation. Not all qualitative factors are equal. So In the Enabling Competency ebook, chapter 21, it talks about how to practice writing concisely. The whole thing is less is more. So provide enough detail, but no more than is necessary. Answer the questions that they've asked you. Don't over deliver because you're not going to be rewarded extra points. And in fact, that's taking away valuable time from completing other assessment opportunities. Explain technical information in very plain English. Avoid long sentences and paragraphs. Make sure that you're eliminating this, the unimportant information. So how do you reduce wordiness? Question the usefulness of each word and phrase. Can you convert some of those clauses into a single words? Can you combine two or more sentences into a single, more concise sentence? Group elements of an issue together. So for example, if you need to analyze a financial reporting issue, plus then you need to provide an audit procedure. Well, then do the financial reporting issue, and then underneath it, do your wrap. So provide your audit procedure, because then you're in the same thought pattern and you're able to be more clear and concise in identifying the risk and providing procedures that relate to the validating whether that criteria is met. So here is an example that is in the ebook of editing for conciseness. So this particular response was actually 110 words, and they could have very easily said it in 37 words. So I'm just going to read the actual response that's clear and concise. So as a self-employed business owner, you have no employer sponsored pension plan. To help maintain your current standard of life after retirement, you might consider retaining this pension plan instead of using it to fund your business investment. Okay? Very clear, to the point, and concise. So another way to ensure that your response is clear, concise, and easy to follow is to use certain discussion frameworks when you're performing your analysis for certain requireds. So talked about using IGAR, or as I've shown here and as I've shown in the Path to Competent and day 2, I've added I. So it's IGAR I, and I standing for impact. So that's the appropriate structure to use. When it comes to what your technical knowledge that you need to know, again, please go to the stress management webinar because I show you how to take this competency map tool, the Excel spreadsheet, and able to filter it by proficiency level. When it comes to the WIR format, okay, and it can stand for weakness, issue, or risk. And this is used when you're being asked to critique something. Okay, so maybe you're being asked to identify internal control weaknesses, issues with the current governance structure, or you're needing to review the proposed contract. So you need to look at the terms. Or maybe you need to review an auditor's junior work. So this is a great format to use when you're critiquing, okay? So, and because what happens is, again, it's clear and concise, and the structure it helps increase your chances of meeting the depth. Because when you look at, if you're asked to identify internal control weaknesses and provide recommendations, the requirement to meet the depth requirement is that you identify the issue, that the weakness, that you discuss the implications, and provide a recommendation that mitigates that weakness. If you're asked to create an audit planning memo, think about RAMP. Okay. And unless you're told specifically you don't need to do one of these areas, that means you need to discuss the risk of material misstatement at the overall financial statement level, the approach, calculate materiality, and provide procedures. When you're providing procedures, think about RAP, risk. A stands for account or accounts, and assertion or assertions and procedure. When you're writing your procedures, think of VPDP, okay? Verb, population, document, and purpose. So I've talked a lot about the importance of including the why and the impact. So let's talk about when you perform your qualitative analysis and you're talking about alignment with mission, vision, or values, you can't just simply say it's aligned with the company's vision. You need to state how it is aligned. When it comes to key success factors, you also need to state how it is aligned. So provide specifics. Plus, you need to discuss the why and the impact. When you perform a SWOT and a PESTLE analysis or pros and cons analysis, you need to include the why and the impact. So here is a depth framework. So the case fact is the what. Use a linking word, could be therefore, and then provide the why. So here's an example. The case fact is that there's a significant increase in the number of competitors. That's the what. So when you use a linking word, which could result in the why, the implication is lower sales than projected. You notice how clear and concise that is? So I want to take a little moment and talk about data analytics and information systems. This is becoming more and more important in what we do on a day-to-day basis. So the competency map specifically, when it comes to the knowledge list and examples, under section 6.7, it talks about data analytics and information systems. There's some great information on the management accounting ebooks, chapter 27 to 30, and it talks about, kind of design, acquisition, and development of IT systems and data integrity. And there is also the information technology ebook. So I want to share with you some of the examples that have been tested on previous CFE exams. Now I'm just giving you examples. I'm not saying that they're going to be your upcoming exam. The only people who know are the people who have created the exam and who are marking the exam. But some of the things in they've passed that they've asked candidates to do is identify patterns from the data analysis, that you need to provide audit procedures around data analytics. You need to evaluate the company's IT system. You need to assess the reporting systems. You need to assess the business practices. And one of the things that unfortunately candidates did poorly in a previous CFE is they asked you to identify anomalies in the data. So they had given that data in one of those pre-populated tabs. And the expectation was that you copied the data and that you input it into your first sheet, and that you identified those anomalies. You needed to identify them, and then you needed to provide audit procedures. So let me take a moment and review some of the key resources. When it came to the quantitative tools, as I said, I got all of this information from the Management Accounting ebook, and I've enclosed the chapters here. When it came to the writing and discussion frameworks, I got that from the Enabling ebook. And as I said, you can access the competency map and the Excel version under Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE. And you keep going until you get to the CPA competency map and go to the bottom, the Excel version. Your flashcards, I shared that also in the live webinar yesterday. For the board examiner's reports. So again, you can access all of the reports, and that will give you day 2, day 3 day 3 cases. It'll give you marking guides and passing sample responses. And then I've also included here where everybody has access to practice cases. Um, there's 18 units that have 16 day 3 cases and 2 day 2 cases. And of course, you have your CFE support webinar series. This series was designed based on a lot of time that was put in reading the Board of Examiners reports for the last 5 years, because the goal was to provide you with a roadmap to successfully pass CFE. So stress management, understanding the CFE, those recordings are already available. The path to competent in day 2 and time management in day 3, those recordings will be available shortly. If I'm going to also be doing day 1 webinars, and that's going to be a deep dive into how to pass day 1. So the live webinars, if you're going to be writing MEI, that's next week, July the 28th. Or if you're writing STC, that's going to be on July the 29th. So as I said, those recordings are available, the D2L homepage for Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE. So at this point, I'd like to I'll open the floor for any questions that you may have.
All right. No, thanks there, Debbie, for tonight's presentation. So we'll spend about approximately 15 minutes for Q&A for tonight's presentation. I know you guys have been giving us a lot of questions, so thank you for that. So please keep them coming, and we'll try to answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion of today's event. So just as Debbie mentioned, so the recordings will be posted within D2L. Just give us a couple days on that. We just have to make sure we do the appropriate edits and everything like that. And then once they're uploaded, we will let you guys know. So keep an eye out in the Introduction to Capstone 2 and the Capstone 2 recordings. All right. So Debbie, I'm just going to jump right in into the Q&A question. So one popular question that came up, and this has come up in prior CFEs there as well. So what if the candidate encounters a situation where they have no idea about how to address the required? Like they know there's an issue, but they don't know how to answer it. What type of advice would you give them in that particular situation?
Sure. Well, the planning process allows you kind of time to think. So what I find is as I'm creating that outline, okay, I'm going to extract the relevant information. And I might think, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. Don't panic. Just keep moving forward finishing creating that outline. And what normally happens is once you stop focusing on the fact that you don't know what you're doing and you use some of these techniques that I talk about in the stress management webinar, you've got to tell yourself to stay calm. You've got to tell yourself you've got to breathe. And you have to tell yourself that you know what you're doing. So keep moving forward. You're creating your outline. And once you kind of get distracted, all of a sudden it's like, the idea comes to mind. You're like, that's what I need to do. So go back and write yourself a note. If you still don't know when you're going through and creating your response, then skip that particular one. Keep writing your response for the other ones. And again, it is going to come to you because if you focus on the fact that you don't know it, you're going to be too stressed and it doesn't allow your brain to really be able to come forth with the idea. So move away from it. Don't sit there and panic. Move away, relax, Keep doing what you need to do, and the idea will come to you, and then you can return to it.
All right, perfect. No, thanks there, Debbie. I'm going to jump into the next one here. So for day three, the question here is, what is the best way to allocate time to each assessment opportunity? So should candidates spend more time on financial reporting and management accounting issues and less on other AOs? Or how about a situation where if a candidate feels like they've reached breadth in a particular topic, so for example, like oh, they've already talked about a tax issue. Should they skip that tax assessment opportunity in favor of like a finance one or anything like that there? So is that a viable strategy for candidates?
Okay. Well, that strategy is making me very uncomfortable. I'll be honest with you. Because again, when you watch the understanding the CFE and how it's marked, nobody knows the number of undisclosed, competent that you need to meet level 2 and 3. Nobody knows the number of reaching competent that you need to meet for level 4, and so it's a very risky strategy. The more important strategy is, again, to do the best that you can within the time frame that you have. So I wouldn't be skipping assessment opportunities. I'd be focusing on doing as much as I can within the time frame that I have, because that increases your chances of meeting those requirements. Because when it comes to level 1, that's meeting an undisclosed scoring. And you know what? You award more points if it's competent, and you're awarded points only for reaching competent. So if you're just going to do a nominal competency or don't do anything at all, it's not helping you towards level 1 or level 4.
All right, sounds good there. Next question is when candidates do a quantitative analysis, should they always state their assumptions?
Okay, so in your Excel spreadsheet, you the marker can see what your inputs are. If you've used a formula within your input to arrive at a number, say you've used 10% annually for revenue growth, you need to include a note. The only time you need to include assumptions, because assumptions is different than inputs. Simply listing the inputs that you've included in Excel, why are you doing that in Word? It's already in Excel. You include assumptions only if there's information based in the case that indicates that assumption could be different, okay? The revenue growth might be different, but that's pretty optimistic because the industry revenue growth is only 5%. Then it's important to highlight the reason you need to talk about assumptions is the user wants to know. So you're telling me NPV over 5 years is positive 100,000, but it's using 10% as a revenue, okay, growth. Industry is only 5. There's a chance that that is being very optimistic. They want to know, okay, so is there a chance that that number might be different? So that's an important assumption. You don't need to calculate what the difference would be, but you need to say what the assumption is, why it might be different, and what the potential impact, that it would have a negative impact on NPV. That's when you need to talk about assumptions. Now, next week, for the live webinars, yeah, it's important when it comes to day 1, and I'll go through that in greater detail then.
All right, no, thanks there. So another question has to do with outlining. So the topic of outlining did come up quite a few times during the Q&A here. So one of the questions pertaining to outlining is the candidates asking what should they do with the case facts after writing the answers out to the outline. So should they delete their outline or just submit it as is? So the candidate's just asking what should they do with the outline itself, like after they've completed.
Sure. Okay, so one of the things here that I showed, so let me just bring this up here. So here's the outline that I created. Here's kind of the accumulation of what was on the PowerPoint presentation. So the things that I would have deleted that I've X'd out, that is what I would have deleted. But the relevant case facts as far as the SWOT, that is going to be my response. The rest of the information here is going to turn into my response. So there shouldn't be too much that you need to keep. Okay, or there shouldn't be too much that you need to delete, because the goal of this best practice is that you want to turn your outline into your response.
All right. So follow up on to that because a lot of candidates had questions about because there was a lot of information on the outline. And what they've heard is that essentially it should take you about 25 minutes to do your reading and outlining and planning. So
Right.
they just wanted to know like expectations wise, is it one where they're expected to have all that information? Is that what's needed for an outline there so that some comments are a little bit struggling on that right now, but want to get your thoughts on
Sure. Sure. Well, first of all, what I'm showing you is something that needs to take a lot of practice. What I will tell you is that I stand behind this best practice. And I know when I work with candidates who are rewriting CFE for the third time, I require that they submit the outline to me. And what I've noticed is many of the candidates, whether they were in the professional education program or not, what they did as an outline is they simply listed the required. That's not enough. That isn't going, you aren't going to be able to turn that quickly into a response. And what I found for those candidates who didn't pass CFE, part of the reason is because they were missing those relevant case facts. And so they didn't have a hope in, you know what, before they even started, they significantly reduced their chances of passing CFE because they didn't have the case facts. So at this point, many candidates have not perfected the skill. That's okay. Know that your start at this point, you need to, I would strongly encourage that you practice this. If you do this best practice, you will get better at it, but it's not going to work right away. You're going to be frustrated. You need to practice. But after a while, yes, did I create that in 25 minutes? Absolutely, I did.
All right. No, thanks for that there, Debbie. So we have a couple minutes left here, so I'll try to just put in a couple more questions for you there, Debbie. So thanks for answering them there. And thanks everyone for submitting your questions as they come in. This question's come up on quite a few CFEs. It's where, when you do a SWOT analysis, Debbie, is there a magic number? Where like how many points you should have pros, cons, and so forth, talking about each of the areas there, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So
Sure.
what is your response to
Okay.
that question?
Well, first of all, if anyone tells you that they know what the magical number is, they're just surmising. Okay. The only people who know what the magical number are is the people who've created the exams and who are marking them. But if you notice, I guess here's some fundamental principles. If you notice, I extracted all the relevant case facts. So the more case facts that they give you, the more that they expect you or that they require for you to achieve a competent. So in this instance, there were several factors under each of them. Okay. So again, I would, in that 5 minutes, I have lots of qualitative factors under each of the items for the SWOT. I'm going to write the why and impact as much as I can uh, within that time frame that I have, and then I'm going to let the rest of them go. I should not have, you do not need to include all of those. I extracted them all, so I showed you very clearly that there are so many relevant case facts here. So I know sometimes candidates make up, qualitative factors. And if you look at a feedback guide, there's normally only 1 point awarded or one opportunity for other value. They're looking for you to extract those case facts. So All I can say is, and I know that this isn't necessarily the answer you want to hear, but the more that you have, the more that's expected. The more that's given, the more that's expected. So be guided by your time allocation. Do as much as you can within the time you have.
All right, no, thanks there, Debbie, for that there. And I know this topic will also be covered in the day one webinars because this is something that Debbie will go through on a grander scale in regards to that there. So that's one thing want to highlight for all you guys there. So if you are writing day one of the CFE, feel free to register in one of the webinars. So don't feel like you have to register in both because Debbie will be going through the same content material. It just will be tailored towards that particular case. So just to let you guys know for that, and that'll be occurring there next week. So yeah, I see we're at the at the 30 mark there. So I'll be closing the Q&A for now, but before we head off here, so just want to let everybody know. So the recording to today's webinar and yesterday's webinar, give us a couple of days here before we end up posting it there and say thank you to Debbie for hosting for tonight's webinar there. And thank you to everyone here. I know many of you guys came yesterday there as well. And we appreciate you spending your evenings or late afternoons with us here as well. So we thank you for coming and we look forward to those who have registered to attend next week's session there. So on behalf of everyone here, CP Western School of Business, CP Ontario, and the CP Atlantic School of Business, have a great evening and good luck in terms of your CP preparation.
Thanks, guys.